The Langley estate stood isolated for decades, a cold relic swallowed by creeping ivy and the thick shadows of the surrounding forest. On the surface, it was a symbol of old wealth and family pride, but underneath lay a legacy stained with madness and whispered horrors. The Langleys were once revered, a name carried with respect and envy, but time revealed fractures that no amount of wealth could mend. Their story is not merely one of decline, but of something far darker, an inherited curse of the mind that twisted love into fear, hope into despair. As locals spoke in hushed tones about the family's strange behaviors and unexplained tragedies, rumors grew like a wildfire in dry brush. What truly broke the Langleys? Was it genetics, fate, or something sinister lurking beneath the polished veneer? Tonight, we pull back the curtains on a family history shrouded in secrets and suffering, exploring the madness that clawed its way through generations and left behind a chilling truth few dared to face. The Langley estate stood isolated for decades, a cold relic swallowed by creeping ivy and the thick shadows of the surrounding forest. On the surface, it was a symbol of old wealth and family pride, but underneath lay a legacy stained with madness and whispered horrors. The Langleys were once revered, a name carried with respect and envy, but time revealed fractures that no amount of wealth could mend. Their story is not merely one of decline, but of something far darker, an inherited curse of the mind that twisted love into fear, hope into despair. As locals spoke in hushed tones about the family's strange behaviors and unexplained tragedies, rumors grew like a wildfire in dry brush. What truly broke the Langleys? Was it genetics, fate, or something sinister lurking beneath the polished veneer? Tonight, we pull back the curtains on a family history shrouded in secrets and suffering, and exploring the madness that clawed its way through generations and left behind a chilling truth few dared to face. Beneath the decaying walls of the Langley estate lies a story few would suspect, a family whose beginnings were steeped in promise and privilege. Jonathan Langley, the patriarch, was a man of stature and ambition, his name synonymous with success in the bustling trade of the late 19th century. Alongside his wife Mary, the family maintained a facade of warmth and normalcy, hosting lavish gatherings that drew the town's elite. Portraits of smiling children, polished floors, and well-tended gardens painted a picture of an idyllic household. Yet beneath this surface, subtle shadows lurked, unnoticed by many but deeply felt by those closest. The children, though appearing well-behaved, exhibited peculiarities, whispers of odd silences, furtive glances, and moments of inexplicable fear that the adults hastily dismissed as childhood fancy. Mary's gentle smile masked an undercurrent of anxiety, a mother's instinct sensing the creeping chaos beneath her carefully constructed world. Friends and neighbors admired the Langleys, yet gossip wove quietly through the town, hinting at strange occurrences behind closed doors. The contrast was stark, a family celebrated publicly, but privately fraying at the edges. This fragile normalcy was a thin veneer, barely concealing the cracks that would soon widen, exposing the darkness festering beneath Jonathan's pride and Mary's desperation. The Langley family's story, as perfect as it seemed, was a prelude to a deeper madness that would unravel everything they once held dear. As the years passed, the carefully maintained facade of the Langley family began to falter, revealing the first unsettling cracks beneath their polished image. What once seemed like innocent childhood quirks grew into troubling behaviors that could no longer be ignored. The children, once the embodiment of youthful innocence, started displaying signs of deep psychological turmoil, nightmares that left them screaming into the night. sudden fits of rage that shattered fragile glass, and an eerie silence that settled over them like a thick fog. Neighbors whispered of strange shadows flitting behind drawn curtains and whispered voices in empty rooms. Mary, once composed and nurturing, was increasingly overwhelmed, caught between the fear for her children and the denial that gripped Jonathan, who insisted these were mere phases to be overcome with discipline and scientific intervention. The house itself seemed to absorb the growing tension. Cold drafts in warm rooms, unexplained noises, and a pervasive sense of dread seeped into every corner. The family's social gatherings dwindled as rumors and fear spread, isolating them further. This slow unraveling was not just psychological, but almost physical, as if an invisible rot gnawed at the core of the Langley legacy. The first cracks, though subtle at first, would soon widen into chasms of madness, blurring the line between love and horror within those once hallowed walls. In the small town surrounding the Langley estate, whispers carried like cold wind through cracked shutters, tales of a curse that had haunted the family for generations. It was said that long before Jonathan's rise to prominence, an ancestor had fallen victim to a terrible betrayal, dooming the bloodline to suffer madness and misfortune. The locals spoke cautiously, half afraid to give voice to the dark legend, yet unable to resist its pull. Folklore painted a grim picture, a shadow cast by ancestral sins feeding on the fragile minds of descendants. Some dismissed it as superstition, a convenient explanation for the inexplicable horrors unfolding within the mansion's walls. But the more the Langley family's troubles deepened, the more these whispered stories gained weight. Mary herself seemed haunted by the curse's invisible hand, her prayers growing desperate, her gaze distant as if battling unseen forces. The family's isolation only grew, fueled by fear and suspicion that the madness was no accident but a punishment woven into their very blood. This looming curse became a lens through which every tragedy was seen, a dark prophecy fulfilling itself in slow, inevitable waves. Whether myth or reality, the whispered curse cast a suffocating shadow over the Langley name, blurring the line between fate and free will, sanity and madness. It was a chilling reminder that some horrors may be inherited, lurking silently until they erupt in devastating clarity. Jonathan Langley's descent into obsession was both tragic and terrifying, a man driven by desperation to wrest control from the creeping madness threatening his family. On the surface, he was the epitome of Victorian rationality, a successful businessman, a devoted husband, a father determined to protect his legacy. But beneath that composed exterior simmered a growing fixation on the emerging fields of psychology and experimental medicine, fueled by his refusal to accept the fate that seemed to loom over his bloodline. He devoured treatises on mental illness, often disregarding contemporary ethics, convinced he alone could unlock the secrets to curing his children. Late nights found him conducting crude experiments in the shadows of the estate, practices bordering on cruel and invasive, all justified by a warped sense of paternal duty. His obsession blinded him to the mounting terror in Mary's eyes and the silent screams of his children. Jonathan's relentless quest for control blurred the line between science and madness, transforming the household into a chamber of horrors disguised as a sanctuary. Friends and servants grew wary, whispering of strange noises and the chilling sight of the patriarch pacing halls, muttering to himself. The very man who had built the family's fortune became its undoing, trapped by a tragic flaw, the belief that madness was a problem to be solved rather than a wound to be understood. This obsession set in motion a chain of events that would irreparably fracture the Langley family, dragging them deeper into darkness and despair. Years after the Langley estate fell silent, A discovery sent shockwaves through the local community. Mary Langley's hidden diaries, tucked away beneath the floorboards of the family's decaying library. These fragile pages, yellowed with age and written in hurried, trembling script, peeled back the carefully constructed facade of the family's public image to reveal a harrowing private torment. Mary's words spoke of love twisted by fear, hope overshadowed by despair, and a growing sense of helplessness as she watched her children unravel. The diaries detailed Jonathan's increasingly erratic behavior, his cold experiments that turned their home into a prison of both flesh and mind. But more haunting were her cryptic warnings, mentions of shadows in the night, voices that whispered secrets no one else dared to hear, and an ever-present feeling of being watched by something unseen. These entries pulsed with raw emotion, a mother's desperation to protect her children from both internal demons and the darkness she sensed closing in from without. The diaries shattered the illusion of a perfect family and foe, forced historians to reconsider the true nature of the Langley madness, not just inherited insanity, but something that clawed at the edges of reality itself. Each page deepened the mystery, leaving readers with an unsettling question. Was Mary's madness a symptom or a warning? In these hidden confessions, the heart of the Langley tragedy beat loudest, echoing through time with a sorrow that refused to be silenced. The Langley children, once bright and full of promise, became shadows of their former selves, lost in a darkness that seemed to seep from the very walls of the estate. Their innocent laughter gave way to chilling silence. Their eyes, once wide with wonder, now held an empty, haunted stare. Strange behaviors emerged, secretive whispers in empty halls, eerie drawings depicting twisted figures and impossible landscapes, and disturbing rituals enacted in hidden corners of the sprawling mansion. Friends and servants alike spoke in hushed tones of children who seemed not quite human. Aloof, distant, and sometimes terrifying. The youngest, a fragile girl named Eliza, was often found murmuring to unseen companions, her small hands stained with ink from endless sketches of distorted faces. The family's once bright hearth had grown cold, replaced by an atmosphere thick with fear and suspicion. These children, victims and perpetrators of the unfolding madness, embodied the tragic duality of innocence lost and corruption gained. They became living symbols of the Langley curse, trapped between childhood and a darkness that consumed them. Each secret they held deepened the family's descent, raising impossible questions about nature and nurture, love and neglect. Their plight evoked both pity and dread, reminders that even the purest souls can be swallowed whole by shadows lurking just beyond the light. Within the towering walls of the Langley estate, a single door remained sealed for years, an ominous barrier to a locked room that whispered of untold horrors. This attic chamber, cold and cloaked in darkness, became the prison for one of the children whose mind had fractured beyond recognition. Neighbors only caught glimpses of the anguished cries that seeped through the floorboards, muffled sobs that spoke of torment and isolation. The family's decision to confine the child was met with hushed condemnation, yet no one dared challenge Jonathan's authority or Mary's desperation. Inside that room, time seemed suspended, a cruel limbo where innocence withered and madness took root. The air was thick with silence, broken only by the scratching of restless fingers and the faint echoes of a fading identity. No visitor ever saw the child's face clearly. The locked door was a barrier not just of wood, but of shame and fear. This confinement symbolized the darkest fracture in the Langley story, a tragic reflection of a family's failure to confront the true nature of their suffering. It forced the question, was the child's madness the cause or the consequence of their isolation? The locked room became a haunting metaphor for the secrets the Langleys buried deep, a place where hope was chained and forgotten, leaving only the cold imprint of human cruelty masked as protection. As the Langley family's darkness seeped beyond the estate's walls, the town's fragile patience snapped, and the community began to turn its back. What had once been whispers of sympathy or polite curiosity twisted into cold avoidance and outright fear. Neighbors shuttered windows when the estate's shadow fell upon their streets. Children were warned to stay away, and merchants refused to serve the family. The social gatherings that once cemented the Langleys' status dissolved into isolation, leaving the family to rot in loneliness and suspicion. This rejection was not just a punishment, but a reflection of society's discomfort with what it could not understand, a family unraveling in plain sight, yet too terrifying to confront. The townsfolk, grappling with rumors of madness and occult practices, chose exile over empathy, creating an invisible barrier between the Langley estate and the world. Mary's silent pleas for help went unanswered, while Jonathan's obsession deepened, fueled by the crushing weight of social exile. The town's turning was a slow burning fracture that amplified the family's descent into despair, underscoring how isolation breeds madness as much as madness breeds isolation. This collective abandonment left the Langleys not just physically cut off, but emotionally severed, amplifying the darkness that consumed them from within and without. When Dr. Elias Harrow arrived at the Langley estate, he stepped into a world teetering on the edge of collapse, a house haunted not just by shadows but by a palpable, festering despair. Harrow was a man of science, trained in the latest psychiatric theories, yet even he found himself unprepared for the chilling atmosphere that greeted him. Jonathan welcomed him with a mixture of hope and desperation, eager for answers that seemed just out of reach. But what Harrow witnessed transcended medical explanation. Children frozen in fearful silence, a mother worn thin by grief, and a father spiraling into obsession. The doctor's meticulous notes recorded symptoms that blurred the boundaries between madness and something darker, hallucinations, violent outbursts, and a pervasive sense of unseen torment. Yet, despite his clinical detachment, Harrow felt the weight of the family's suffering press against him like a living force. He questioned whether these afflictions were hereditary curses, the result of environmental decay, or manifestations of a family haunted by its own secrets. His presence ignited hope, but also exposed the fragile veneer holding the Langley family together. In trying to heal the Langleys, Harrow found himself entangled in a psychological labyrinth, confronting not only their madness, but the limits of his own understanding and the darkness lurking within human nature itself. Amid the growing chaos, a series of letters surfaced, handwritten pleas from the eldest Langley child, Thomas, scrawled in trembling ink and desperation. These letters peeled back the final layers of the family's crumbling facade, revealing a perspective raw with fear and isolation. Thomas, trapped between childlike innocence and harrowing awareness, chronicled the horrors unfolding behind the estate's heavy doors. His words spoke of whispered arguments late into the night, the coldness that had seeped into his parents' eyes, and the suffocating silence that swallowed his siblings one by one. He begged for help, reaching out to distant relatives and even local authorities, only to be met with dismissal or silence. His letters hinted at a home-turned prison where love was twisted into control and protection bled into punishment. More chillingly, Thomas described shadowy figures appearing at the edge of the family's vision, and a creeping dread that something beyond human was watching them all. These letters, fragments of a desperate soul, captured the slow, suffocating unraveling of a family, caught between reality and nightmare. They stand as a haunting testament to innocence pleading to be saved but ultimately abandoned to the darkness closing in. Under the shroud of darkness, the Langley estate concealed secrets darker than mere madness, whispers of midnight rituals that chilled even the bravest souls. Servants spoke in trembling voices of eerie gatherings in the cellar, where flickering candlelight danced against damp stone walls, and strange symbols were etched into the cold floor. These clandestine meetings, veiled from prying eyes, blurred the lines between desperation and fanaticism, as Jonathan's obsession warped into something unrecognizable. Neighbors reported faint chants carried on the night air, a cadence both hypnotic and horrifying, stirring fear that the family had turned to forbidden practices in a futile attempt to break their curse. Mary's presence was often felt, a shadow at the periphery, her prayers muttered in an unsteady voice, caught between hope and terror. The rituals seemed less about salvation and more about control, a desperate grasp at power over forces unseen and unyielding. Whether these gatherings were spiritual pleas or manifestations of madness, they became the darkest thread weaving through the Langley narrative. The midnight rituals transformed the estate into a theater of psychological horror, where faith twisted into fear, and the boundary between ritual and insanity dissolved into chilling obscurity. The fragile equilibrium that held the Langley family together finally shattered in a violent crescendo, an eruption that would forever stain the town's memory. One stormy night, beneath a sky heavy with thunder, the estate became a scene of chaos and terror. Doors slammed with unrelenting force, piercing screams echoed through the halls, and the long-buried madness clawed its way into the open. Jonathan, consumed by his obsessions and haunted by the weight of his failures, confronted his family with a fury born of desperation. The children, fractured and terrified, became both victims and catalysts of the unfolding nightmare. Servants fled in horror, whispering of unexplainable violence and cryptic cries for mercy. When the authorities finally arrived, they found a house soaked in silence, punctuated only by the hollow sobs of those left standing. The collapse was not just physical but spiritual, a family torn apart by secrets, fear, and a darkness that had seeped into every corner of their lives. Eyewitness accounts varied, clouded by shock and confusion, but all agreed on one thing. The Langley madness had reached a breaking point, and there was no turning back. This night marked the end of the family's public facade and the beginning of a haunting legacy that would echo for generations. The fallout from the Langley collapse spilled into the cold, unyielding walls of the courtroom, where public fascination collided with grim reality. The trial became a spectacle, a dark theater, where the private horrors of a family were laid bare for all to witness. Lawyers wielded accusations like weapons, painting Jonathan as a tyrant and Mary as a fragile victim, while the children's fractured testimonies wove a tapestry of confusion and pain. The courtroom echoed with whispers of madness, neglect, and unspeakable acts, leaving the jury and spectators torn between sympathy and revulsion. Legal proceedings struggled to untangle the web of trauma, obsession, and secrecy that had engulfed the Langleys. Experts debated the nature of mental illness, heredity, and responsibility, but the law found itself ill-equipped to address the profound moral ambiguities at play. Families in the town watched with a mixture of schadenfreude and sorrow, their fear of the unknown mingling with a grim satisfaction in the family's downfall. Yet beneath the public spectacle lay a deeper tragedy, a family shattered not only by internal demons, but by a society unprepared to understand or help. The courtroom shadows stretched long, casting doubt on justice and leaving questions about truth, blame, and forgiveness hanging heavy in the air. Years after the court's final verdict, Dr. Elias Harrow's confession emerged from the shadows, an admission that sent ripples through the already fractured narrative of the Langley tragedy. In a candid memoir, Harrow revealed the moral compromises and haunting regrets that had plagued him since his fateful visit. He confessed to pushing experimental treatments beyond ethical boundaries, driven by a desperate hope to save the family but blinded by his own hubris. His notes, once clinical and detached, now read like a tortured man's diary, filled with doubts about whether his interventions worsened the family's suffering rather than alleviating it. Harrow admitted to silencing voices within the family, ignoring warnings, and overlooking signs that should have halted his work. This confession forced the public and historians alike to confront a disturbing question. Was the Langley family doomed by inherited madness, or was their downfall hastened by the very person meant to heal them? The doctor's admission blurred the lines between victim and perpetrator, healer and tormentor, highlighting the tragic complexity of human frailty. It was a stark reminder that sometimes those entrusted with salvation can become the architects of despair, their good intentions unraveling into unintended cruelty. Harrow's confession reopened wounds long thought closed, deepening the moral shadows that hung over the Langley legacy. Beneath the crumbling floors of the Langley estate, a dark secret lay buried, one that would forever alter the understanding of the family's madness. When authorities finally dared to explore the cellar, they uncovered a chilling tableau. Cryptic symbols etched into the stone walls, jars filled with strange substances, and dusty journals that hinted at rituals far beyond Victorian superstition. These artifacts suggested a desperate attempt to wrest control from the invisible forces tormenting the family, a mixture of occult practices, forbidden knowledge, and perhaps something far more sinister. The cellar, once a place of mundane storage, had become a clandestine chamber of fear and power, a hidden theater where Jonathan's scientific obsession intertwined with dark spiritual rites. The journals revealed fevered entries, notes on ancient texts, arcane symbols, and invocations whispered in trembling desperation. Servants who had long fled recounted hushed rumors of nightly ceremonies and unseen presences that seemed to grow stronger with each passing year. This discovery fractured any remaining illusions. The Langley madness was not just a psychological tragedy, but a tapestry woven with threads of occult desperation and human terror. The secrets in the cellar stood as a grim testament to a family's futile battle against forces both within and beyond, blurring the line between madness, faith, and something far more terrifying. Amid the wreckage of the Langley legacy, one figure remained, a solitary survivor whose fate was as enigmatic as the family's dark history itself. Eleanor Langley, the youngest daughter, vanished from public records shortly after the estate's collapse, leaving behind only fragmented whispers and unanswered questions. Some claimed she escaped the madness that consumed her kin, seeking refuge in distant cities under assumed names. Others whispered she was, as swallowed by the same darkness that had claimed the rest. Eleanor's survival was both a beacon of hope and a haunting reminder of what was lost. Those who glimpsed her later spoke of a woman forever changed, eyes haunted, voice subdued, carrying the weight of unspeakable memories. Her silence became a shield, guarding secrets that might have unraveled the final threads of the Langley mystery. Despite decades of searching, no definitive trace of Eleanor emerged, fueling speculation that she bore the last scars of a family cursed beyond redemption. Her story embodies the tragic duality at the heart of the Langley tale. Survival intertwined with profound loss, escape shadowed by eternal torment. Eleanor remains a ghostly figure on the edge of history, a living testament to the endurance and fragility of the human spirit amid unimaginable darkness. The Langley family was never truly united. Beneath the surface of their shared blood lay fractures deeper than anyone dared to acknowledge. As madness crept through the estate, loyalties splintered and trust dissolved into suspicion and fear. Siblings who once played side by side became strangers, their relationships strained by jealousy, resentment, and the creeping paranoia that something or someone was tearing them apart. Jonathan's authoritarian grip only fueled division, his obsession isolating him from Mary and driving wedges between the children. Mary, torn between protecting her family and confronting its horrors, oscillated between denial and despair, leaving her children to navigate the crumbling bonds alone. Servants and townsfolk whispered of heated confrontations behind closed doors, shouting matches, cold silences, and moments of fleeting tenderness overshadowed by growing distance. Each family member became trapped in their own psychological prison, their shared madness fracturing into individual horrors. The unity that once defined the Langleys eroded, replaced by a toxic web of blame, fear, and unmet needs. This division was both cause and consequence of their downfall, a tragic mirror reflecting the human capacity for both connection and destruction. In the end, the Langley family's greatest enemy was not external curses or madness. It was the relentless fracturing of the very ties meant to bind them together. The psychological toll inflicted upon the Langley family and those who dared draw near was profound and far-reaching, a haunting legacy that extended well beyond the estate's crumbling walls. What began as isolated incidents of distress grew into a pervasive malaise that consumed minds and hearts alike, leaving scars invisible but no less devastating. Survivors grappled with trauma that manifested as nightmares, dissociation, and an unrelenting sense of dread that shadowed their every step. The children, robbed of a normal upbringing, carried fractured psyches into adulthood, their identities splintered by fear and neglect. Mental health, a concept barely understood in their time, offered little solace or explanation. Instead, it was a source of stigma and isolation. The town itself bore psychological wounds, generations haunted by the Langley name, trapped in a collective memory of fear and suspicion. Modern psychological analysis suggests a complex interplay of hereditary predisposition, environmental abuse, and social isolation that created a perfect storm for madness. Yet even with today's understanding, the full extent of the family's torment remains elusive. A chilling reminder of how fragile the human mind can be when confronted with unrelenting darkness. The Langley story forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about mental illness, that it can be both inherited and inflicted, misunderstood and feared, and ultimately, devastatingly isolating. Their tragedy is a cautionary tale about the cost of neglect, both personal and societal, and the fragile boundary between sanity and despair. Long after the Langley family faded from the pages of local records, their estate lingered as a physical and psychological scar on the landscape, a decaying monument to madness and tragedy. The once grand mansion, now overgrown with tangled vines and broken windows, became a magnet for fear and speculation. Townsfolk spun tales of ghostly figures glimpsed in the moonlight, of inexplicable sounds echoing through empty halls, and of shadows moving where no light dared reach. The estate's reputation grew, morphing into a dark legend whispered among children and daring adolescents who dared to venture too close. What was once a symbol of prosperity now stood as a grim reminder of the family's fall, a place where sorrow and terror seemed woven into the very bricks. Real estate agents refused to list the property, and some locals swore it was cursed, a locus where the past's horrors clung stubbornly to the present. This reputation did more than isolate the physical structure. It perpetuated the Langley legacy of fear, ensuring that the story of madness, secrecy, and despair would never be forgotten. The estate's ruin became a mirror reflecting the darkest corners of human nature, a place where history and myth collided and where the echoes of a family's downfall continue to haunt the collective memory. Despite decades of scrutiny, the Langley family's story remains shrouded in unsettling ambiguity, an enigma that refuses to yield clear answers. Historians, psychologists, and curious townsfolk alike have grappled with the puzzle. Was the family truly cursed, doomed by an ancestral sin whispered in dark folklore? Or were they victims of hereditary mental illness, exacerbated by isolation and unchecked obsession? Some argue the madness stemmed from Jonathan's ruthless experiments, while others suggest the environment itself, a toxic blend of fear, secrecy, and social exile, bred the psychological decay. Conflicting testimonies, lost records, and deliberately concealed evidence muddy the waters further, leaving more questions than resolutions. Was Mary a tormented mother fighting against fate, or a woman broken beyond repair? Did the children suffer from inherited madness, or were they shaped by trauma and neglect? And what role did the rumored occult rituals truly play? Superstition, desperate control, or something far darker? The unanswered questions linger like ghosts, haunting the narrative and inviting endless speculation. This refusal of closure deepens the story's psychological grip, forcing us to confront the uncomfortable truth that some horrors resist neat explanations. In the shadows between fact and myth, the Langley family's tragedy unfolds as a chilling reminder of the complexity of human suffering and the terrifying unknowns that lurk beneath even the most carefully told histories. The Langley family's dark saga did not fade into obscurity. Instead, it seeped into the cultural fabric, becoming a haunting legacy that continues to captivate and disturb. Books, documentaries, and whispered tales have kept their story alive, transforming the family's tragedy into a symbol of human fragility and the shadowy depths of inherited madness. Modern historians and psychologists revisit the case, dissecting the complex interplay of genetics, environment, and trauma that shaped the Langley's descent. The estate itself, though abandoned, attracts those fascinated by the macabre, paranormal investigators, historians, and thrill-seekers drawn to its crumbling walls and dark reputation. In popular culture, the Langleys have become archetypes for sinister family narratives, embodying themes of secrecy, obsession, and the devastating impact of unresolved trauma. Their story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of ignoring mental illness and the consequences of isolation and denial. Yet amid fascination, there remains a somber respect, a recognition that behind the myth lies real suffering and loss. The Langley legacy challenges us to look beyond sensationalism and confront uncomfortable truths about the human psyche, the scars of history, and the echoes that trauma leaves across generations. It is a chilling testament to how the past's darkest shadows can persist, shaping not only memory, but identity itself. The Langley children were once the embodiment of innocence, bright-eyed, hopeful, and full of promise. Yet, as the shadows crept into their lives, that innocence was steadily stolen, replaced by fear, confusion, and a growing darkness. Their childhoods, which should have been filled with laughter and discovery, became battlegrounds of control and despair. The youngest, Eliza, sketched haunting images no child should know, while Thomas's desperate letters revealed a mind trapped between the innocence of youth and the crushing weight of terror. They were caught in a cruel paradox. Victims of a family legacy they neither chose nor understood. yet also carriers of a madness that corrupted their very souls. This loss of innocence was not sudden, but a slow, painful erosion. Each broken promise, each whispered secret, each violent outburst chipping away at the fragile light within them. Their story forces us to confront the tragic consequences of a childhood stolen by fear and neglect, and the devastating impact of trauma that imprints itself on the youngest and most vulnerable. Innocence Lost is more than a theme. It is the haunting heart of the Langley tragedy, a reminder that sometimes darkness does not just visit, but takes permanent residence within the soul. The Langley family's descent into madness serves as a dark mirror, reflecting the fragile boundaries between sanity and insanity, order and chaos, love and destruction. Their story forces us to peer into the depths of human nature, where the lines blur and darkness can take root in even the most sacred places. Behind every act of cruelty and desperation lies a tortured attempt to grasp control over a world slipping into chaos. Jonathan's obsession, Mary's silent suffering, the children's fractured minds all reveal how easily the human psyche can fracture when pressed beyond its limits. The Langley saga embodies a universal truth. Madness is not merely a personal affliction, but a reflection of societal failures, isolation, and unspoken fears. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable questions about inheritance, choice, and the power of secrets to poison generations. The family's tragedy is a haunting allegory of how darkness can echo through time, silently shaping lives and identities long after the initial wound. In this mirror of madness, we see not just the Langley family's downfall, but a broader human struggle, the perilous dance with our own inner demons, and the fragile line separating reason from ruin. It is a story that lingers, unsettles, and forces reflection long after the last page is turned. In the quiet aftermath of the Langley tragedy, one image remains, a silent portrait that captures the family's haunting legacy with unsettling clarity. The faded photograph, taken years before the collapse, shows the Langleys seated formally, their faces carefully composed yet betraying cracks beneath the surface. Their eyes, dark and distant, seemed to hold secrets no words could express, a collective sorrow and madness frozen in time. This portrait is more than a mere photograph. It is a testament to the fragile veneer that once held the family together, now shattered beyond repair. It invites us to look beyond appearances and question what lies hidden beneath the facades we all wear. The Langley family's story ends not with answers, but with lingering silence, a reminder that some tragedies resist closure, leaving only echoes and shadows. In this stillness, we are confronted with the true cost of inherited madness and unspoken fears, a chilling legacy etched into the very fabric of their existence. The silent portrait stands as a final, haunting symbol, a family forever caught between love and despair, sanity and madness, life and the dark abyss beyond. It is a closing reflection on the human condition itself, and the shadows that dwell within us all,